Hello. Tonight we're going to pick up where we left off 2 weeks ago when we discussed liberalism and the origins of the state with a discussion of the political spectrum. Have you ever wondered where the terms left and right come from? Left and right sound like two ends of the spectrum, but that's not really true. The origins of the term come from the French Revolution and specifically the French National Assembly, which was a thing whereby the various representatives of the power groups got together in a room with the monarchists, that is, the people who supported the king, seated to the king's right, and the people who didn't support the king seated across from them to the king's left. Yes, it actually comes from how people were organized in a room. I'm as surprised as you are. This is why we say right wing and left wing, because buildings have wings, right? A wing is a word for an end of the building. So the right wingers were on the right end or side of the building, and the left wingers on the left side of the building, or it would be even more fun if we thought of the king as a chicken with the monarchists aligned with his right wing, that is arm, and the anti-monarchists on the side of his left wing or arm. Was King Louis XVI actually a chicken? Reports differ. Why didn't the pro-monarchists call themselves the pro-monarchists and the anti-monarchists call themselves the anti-monarchists? Well, if you've watched the TV show Andor, which is about how the rebellion against the Galactic Empire got started in Star Wars, you would know that there can be a variety of views and political positions among those who oppose a despotic regime, as well as those who support a despotic regime. Some of the people on the left were separatists. Some of the people on the left were communists. Some of the people on the right wanted an absolute monarchy, and some of them wanted a constitutional monarchy. Some of them were pro-Jedi. Some of them were human supremacists. Wait, I may be getting the show mixed up with the actual history. Never mind about that. What's interesting is that the terms left and right persisted well beyond their original usage in reference to the French Assembly. This means that people must have found them useful insofar as they expressed a kind of core alignment or meaning. They brought people of diverse views together insofar as, although they disagreed with each other, they were agreed in their opposition to, those other guys. People have tried to explain those meanings, that core opposition, in different terms, but in this lecture, I'm going to go with a common way of understanding the opposition between left and right, which is that the left is about spreading out power, whereas the right is about concentrating power. Here is an image of the political spectrum, one of many that I found online. As you can see, it's organized from left to right, although it might be more helpful to think of it as like starting in the center and then sort of spreading out in both directions. In the center, we find liberalism and something else that's called social liberalism. Many political talking heads may identify the terms liberal and leftist and treat them as they're interchangeable. But as you can see in this version, liberalism is smack dab in the center. And I like that because of what I said in the lecture on liberalism, that it isn't so much a political position among other political positions, but something more like the framework in which all of politics takes place now. So as we move left, we see what I imagine are some fairly familiar terms. The center left, social democracy, and progressivism. Why is it called the center left? Well, it's the left that's closest to the center. You move further left, you get socialism and democratic socialism, which is something different from social democracy, apparently. How confusing. There are also pictures, images, which is basically the iconography associated with certain political parties and movements. There's the famous hammer and sickle over here on the far left, where it says communism, anarcho-communism, and then the word revolutionary, which is not a political position. It's an adjective. Sorry about that. Let's look at the right. We have Christian democracy, which is not a thing that we've talked about, but you may know about, you may have heard about. Liberal conservatism. What the hell is that? Isn't that an oxymoron? Well, liberal conservatism, I don't know of anybody who calls themselves a liberal conservative. Maybe people might call themselves a moderate conservative, which means that they're slightly conservative, a sort of median between a conservative and a person who isn't insane. So we have conservatism, libertarianism. Hey, we talked about that. And on the far right, we have nationalism, fascism, and anarcho-capitalism. Does this suggest that fascism is some kind of roided up conservatism, or that conservatism is a kind of watered down fascism? Well, yes, but that's actually kind of the opposite of the point I'm going to be trying to make in this lecture. So in political discourse, the term liberal or progressive, the terms liberal and progressive are typically used to refer to people on the left, and the term conservative is commonly used to refer to people on the right, even though the spectrum does assign, different names to people at different points on the spectrum. But these terms are somewhat fluid. Not everyone uses them consistently. I just wanted you to know that in the lecture, I may, from time to time, use the word conservative to refer to people on the right, or progressive to refer to people on the left. This language makes it seem like the difference is between people who want to keep things the same and people who want to change them. And it is true that if we go back to the origins of the terms left and right, some of the people on the right did want to keep things the same. Well, they couldn't keep them the same because there was a revolution going on, but they wanted to go back to the way things were with the monarchy, so sort of keep them the same. Whereas the people who wanted to get rid of the monarchy certainly did want to make a change. Getting rid of the monarchy is a pretty big change. They wanted a whole different political system. However, you can also see that the people on the left did want to spread out power insofar as they wanted to get rid of the monarchy. I mean, a monarchy, at least in its absolute form, where the king has all of the power. And I find this way of thinking more helpful because it captures a sort of trend that extends both into the past before the French Revolution and into the future, our past, maybe our future after the French Revolution. There had been attempts to limit, restrict, or reduce the power of kings prior to the French Revolution, the best known of which was the English Magna Carta, which dates back to, I think, the 13th century. The Magna Carta put into writing that the king couldn't just do whatever he wanted, that there were limits to his power, and the lords and barons, the sort of people who had their little kingdom-like things under the dominion of the king, had rights and powers that the king couldn't infringe upon. The Magna Carta is just one example. It happened many different times in many different nations, but the Magna Carta has become a sort of symbol of constitutional monarchies, limiting the power of kings, and a change from the concentration of all of the power in the person of the king or monarch to it being spread out among an aristocracy of the upper classes, the people who owned land and oppressed the serfs and peasants under them who had no rights. But now the power wasn't just in one person, it was spread out among a whole class. From there, it was spread out more and more with quite a lot of work and no small amount of spilt blood to larger and larger groups of people, wider and wider, until we have the modern form of democracy, where theoretically every adult has a share in the power of the state, has a say in the form of a vote. Notice that this goes along with the story that I told you in the previous lecture about liberalism and the social contract, but it's more complicated. That version of the story kind of implied that there were two states, two sets of conditions, feudalism, which was then overthrown with liberalism, and also kind of implies that the change happened all at once in a single step, represented symbolically with the notion of the social contract, which, as we discussed last time, didn't actually happen. People didn't come together in the form of a voluntary agreement. Instead, kingdoms were formed through conquest and oppression, and only very gradually was power painfully drawn away from the concentration in the monarchy, like pulling teeth. Yeah, that works. Kings have a lot of teeth, right? And today's monarchies, like the one in the UK or the one in the Netherlands, are pretty toothless. I promise I didn't plan that joke at all. But this lecture has a surprise twist, which is also its main thesis, which is that the political spectrum doesn't actually exist. But how can that be? Don't we have a picture of the political spectrum right here on the screen? And isn't it logical? Isn't social democracy closer to socialism than it is to conservatism or fascism? Well, to begin with, the political spectrum is an abstraction, and while the political spectrum doesn't exist is a nice sort of punchy thesis, it would be more accurate to say that the political spectrum is maybe not the best way of thinking about politics. And to bring it back to the image, which I'll remind you is only one of many possible ways to represent the political spectrum, but this is a pretty common one. It's a pretty normal one. It's not clear that, say, socialism is any more left than progressivism. I mean, what does that even mean, more left? It implies some sort of quantitative metric that, like, progressivism is like 6 out of 10 left, but socialism is like 8 out of 10 left. That doesn't really make any sense. Socialism and progressivism are quite different, actually. Certainly possible to be socialist, but not really all that progressive. Progressivism is about being accepting of different identities, letting people be the people that they want to be instead of being confined by social structures such as patriarchy. But socialism isn't about that at all. Socialism is like an economic position. Do you see what I mean? So when I was trying to sort of try out this lecture on a friend, sort of bounce ideas off of him, let him know where I was going with it. He said, wait, I can think of people on the left who don't want to spread out power, and I can think of people on the right who don't want to concentrate power. What about Marxist Leninists? You know, people who stand the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a dictatorship. It was all about concentrating power. And yet, communism is aligned with the left, right? And what about anarcho-capitalists? Like, anarchism is a left-wing position, but capitalism is normally associated with the right. How does that fit in? This was very helpful because I had to come up with a response, like responding to objections in an essay. And the response that I came up with was the person that you argue with online who says he's a leftist but supports Putin is not a counterexample to the logic that the right is about concentrating power and the left is about spreading out power, because politics is not like gender. You don't get to just identify as a leftist and everybody has to believe you.
Oh my goodness, wait till you see Lady Pool. She is gorgeous. She just had a baby too and can't even tell.
I don't think you're supposed to say that.
That's okay. I identify as a feminist.
You see, there's this thing that people who wanted to do politics invented a really long time ago. It's called lying. Although it's sometimes useful, think of politics as a spectrum, this approach can mislead us in potentially damaging ways. For one thing, it tends to create a false sense of equivalence. Like when people say or treat the far left and the far right as equally extremist or equally dangerous. When people on the far left are for things like polyamory and universal basic income, whereas people on the far right are in the habit of shooting people. Or how about this meme, which I came across while looking for images of the political spectrum? It poses the question, what's wrong with being a right winger? And it answers nothing. Like being a left winger, both are simply reflections of one's political beliefs and aspirations. I find this hilarious because the implication here, the logical implication, is that all political beliefs are equally valid and there are no bad beliefs, apparently. Well, imagine it's 1850, and instead of right winger and left winger, we were presented with the same meme where it said instead of right winger, pro slavery, and left winger, anti slavery. Does it seem like both of these views are equally valid and totally harmless? And I didn't pick the slavery example as some sort of misleading analogy or straw man. It's a totally relevant example because in 1850, the people on what we would now call the political left were abolitionists. People who wanted to abolish slavery called themselves abolitionists. And the people who wanted to keep slavery around were the same sort of people making the same sort of arguments as those align with the political right today. It just is the right and the left just 150 years ago. In 1789, people on the right wanted monarchy and people on the left wanted democracy. In 1850, people on the left wanted to get rid of slavery, people on the right wanted to keep slavery. In the 1910s and 20s, the people on the left wanted to extend the vote to women, and the people on the right didn't want to allow women to vote. In the 1990s and 2000s, people on the left wanted to extend the right to marriage to same-sex couples, and the people on the right didn't want to do that. Do you see a pattern here? Today, the fight is over whether trans people should be allowed to exist, apparently. Gee, I wonder what everybody's going to think in 100 years. This gets back to what I was saying at the beginning of the course about arguments. That things that we make arguments about are not matters of opinion. If they were really matters of opinion, there'd be no argument to make. It's not like, do you prefer Star Trek or Star Wars? Or do you think Marvel movies are better than DC movies? Politics is very different from what movies you like. Politics is about real life. It has real consequences. And nothing constrains us to accommodate people who have beliefs that are both incorrect and harmful. Last week, we had an election in Ontario. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't notice. The Conservative Party, led by Doug Ford, won the election, and Doug Ford became premier. Well, he was already premier, but now he gets to be premier for another 4 years. Hooray! Actually, not hooray. Actually, it's a pretty safe bet that people are going to die now, people who wouldn't have died if the Conservatives had not won the election. So I'm going to break with custom here and tell you something about my personal life. My girlfriend has type 1 diabetes, which is an incurable but totally manageable illness. But because for most of her adult life, she has been unable to access the medical care that she needs, it has been slowly destroying her body. She used to be a hardworking member of society, like really, really hardworking, unusually hardworking. But now, not only can't she hold down a job, I have to spend a not insignificant chunk of my time taking care of her. This is one reason why it can take me days or sometimes even weeks to respond to an email, or why I don't usually get these lectures finished and uploaded until early Monday morning, despite the fact that I usually start working on them Wednesday night. Why has my girlfriend been unable to access needed health care? Because previous conservative governments have cut health care spending. So there are fewer doctors, nurses, technicians, equipment needed to do tests, etc., and some more complicated stuff. So, if you're wondering why this lecture has been delayed for so long, it's because people don't think politics is important. Obviously, this doesn't mean that the way this course has been so disorganized isn't my fault. I'm not making excuses here. I'm just trying to make a point. Politics is not like sports teams or the what kind of movies you like, because politics has real consequences. And I wanted to give an example of how it has consequences for you specifically. And here's something that might blow your mind. Being apolitical is not really an option. This sort of connects with how with my thesis that the political spectrum isn't really a spectrum, that it's two opposing tendencies, and there's not really any middle road between A and not A. Anyway, I feel like I lost a little bit of momentum there. Being apolitical is not really an option. Why? Because when fewer voters turn up to vote, right-wing political parties, so the conservatives here or the Republicans in the US, do better. They tend to win elect they're more likely to win elections when the lower voter turnout is lower. As I record this, reports are coming in that this phenomenon had a huge impact on last week's election. Approximately 66% of Ontario approximately 66% of Ontario voters didn't want Doug Ford to win, but he won anyway. And in America, they have Donald Trump. Less than a quarter of eligible American voters voted for Donald Trump. And somehow he still became president. Imagine that, becoming president with 25% of the vote. How does that happen? Well, it's complicated, but the very simple version is that demographically, the group of people that tends to vote conservative, right wing, also tends to more consistently show up to vote on voting day. And that group is old people. Why are old people more likely to turn up to vote? I don't know. Um, One theory is that many of them are retired and consequently they just have more time. So, by comparison, young people like you guys are overwhelmingly left-leaning. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you voted last week. I can't see you, obviously, but I don't really need to see you, do I? Anyway, it's not my intention to scold you for not voting. I know some of you listening to me now did vote, and I thank you for that. My point is, you can't actually be apolitical, meaning you can't not choose a side, because not choosing a side, because refusing to choose a side has the effect of favoring one side over the other. I'm sorry, but I don't make the rules. I don't want to have to vote either. I'd rather be talking about phenomenology or how Andor is the best Star Wars series. But right now, talking about politics is my job. And Star Wars isn't real, and we don't get to do the kind of heroism that we see on Star Wars. But the closest we can get to heroism in real life is me here telling you things you don't want to hear, and also voting. Geez, who thought a course called Reasoning About Social Issues was going to get political? If we consider the list of positions that are associated with the left, meaning things that people who identify with the left or who are identified by other people as being on the left, they seem to be pretty consistently in line with spreading out power and trying to make people equal through things like having higher taxes on the wealthy, regulating businesses so that they don't exploit employees and consumers, that sort of thing. Oh, wait. Um, I don't know if I need to explain how this list of positions on social issues is different from the political spectrum on the previous slide. But just in case, I will explain it. So this contains a list of political perspectives, or you could call them political philosophies. They're all broader and less specific than, say, being pro-abortion or anti-abortion. If somebody says they're a socialist, that doesn't tell you where they stand on abortion or whether they're a vegetarian. It's two different levels of analysis, as philosophers like to say. People might refer to libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism as positions on the political spectrum, but they're not positions in the same sense as a position on a social issue. In the case of a position on a social issue, the word position is functioning more like the thesis of an argument, whereas positions on the political spectrum just means where they are on a line. This line, like their physical positions, literally to the left or right of something. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, ignore it. It's not all that important. Unless it was a question that was bothering you, you can just leave it. So as I was saying, this list of positions on social issues that are commonly held among people who are identified as being on the political left do seem to hang together. They do seem to be consistently about spreading out power and flattening down hierarchies. The right, on the other hand, hand. See what I did there? It's not immediately clear that the views that are typically held by people aligned with the political right are about concentrating power or maintaining hierarchies. Some of them, sure. It's easy to see pro-military and pro-cop as being about enforcing power hierarchies. But what about small government? That sounds like the opposite of concentrating power. Being against regulating businesses, but for regulating women's bodies seems kind of weirdly inconsistent. But neither of these positions is clearly about concentrating power or maintaining hierarchies. In fact, this list of the most popular positions on social issues among conservatives or people on the right doesn't seem to be consistently about anything. Like, how can you be in favor of small government, but also want more cops and a big military? Like, what says big government more than people with guns enforcing the government's decisions and policies? There's a joke that people make about conservatives who want to ban abortion, so-called pro-lifers. They believe that life is sacred. No, they believe that life is sacred from birth to conception. Then you're on your own. The joke here, in case I have to explain it, all truly good jokes need to be explained, of course. The joke is that, according to them, a woman terminating her pregnancy is murder. But if that same child dies a few months or a few years later because of a lack of health care or proper nutrition, because conservatives oppose social welfare, that's totally fine. Also, they're pro-capital punishment, so apparently the sanctity of life doesn't apply when it comes to the state executing people for crimes. Curious. How about this? Asking people to wear masks during a pandemic is too much of a restriction on their freedom. But also, teachers should be fired for telling kids that gay people exist. Small government, lower taxes on the wealthy, and letting corporations do whatever they want seems to hang together in some sort of consistent philosophy. But why would the same people oppose reproductive freedom and letting people use their preferred pronouns? Like, are you for freedom or aren't you? So people used to talk about the difference between fiscal conservatives and social conservatives. Fiscal conservatives want to cut government spending and lower taxes. They also think that the economy performs better when the government doesn't restrict what private businesses do and leaves everything to the free market. Here, the word fiscal means having to do with money. It has the same root as the word financial, probably. Social conservatives, on the other hand, want to return to traditional values like women obeying their husbands and gay people staying in the closet. They think that young people should not have sex before marriage, while also being in favor of lowering the legal minimum age that you're allowed to get married, presumably so that the kids don't have to wait as long. It's very thoughtful of them. Often they want to lower the age to as low as 13 or 14. I'm suggesting that maybe you could resolve the seeming contradiction between being against the interference of government in the private sector while also being for government interfering in our private lives by appealing to this difference. Fiscal conservatives want government to leave us alone, while social conservatives want government to enforce their social mores and religious views. The problem with this is that these aren't really two separate groups of people. Maybe at one time, there were people who were fiscal conservatives, but not social conservatives, and vice versa. But more and more, we see people holding both sets of views at the same time. If you want to learn more about fiscal conservatism and social conservatism, here's a very boring video that discusses the difference.
What are the differences between fiscal conservatism and social conservatism? If you're trying to understand the different types of conservative ideologies, you might be wondering what sets fiscal conservatism apart from social conservatism. Let's break it down to help you grasp these concepts better. Fiscal conservatism is all about how the government manages its money. People who believe in fiscal conservatism think that the government should spend less, tax less, and avoid accumulating a lot of debt. They believe in living within the government's means, just like you would with your personal budget. This means cutting down on unnecessary spending, reducing taxes to boost economic growth, and ensuring the government doesn't overspend and create deficits. On the other hand, social conservatism focuses on social issues and moral values. Social conservatives often advocate for traditional values and social norms. They might support policies that align with their views on family, marriage, education, and other social matters. Unlike fiscal conservatives, social conservatives are not primarily concerned with government spending or taxation, but rather with promoting what they see as moral and social stability. To illustrate the difference, consider a fiscal conservative who might support lower taxes and reduced government spending, even if it means cutting some social programs. In contrast, a social conservative might advocate for stricter laws on certain social issues, even if it requires more government intervention and spending in those areas. Fiscal conservatives also believe in a smaller government role in the economy, advocating for free market principles and minimal government interference. They think that individuals and businesses are better at managing resources than the government. This is why they often support deregulation and lower taxes to stimulate economic growth. In contrast, social conservatives are more concerned with maintaining traditional social structures and values. They may support policies that they believe will strengthen families, promote religious values, or uphold certain moral standards. These policies can sometimes require more government involvement in social issues, which is different from the fiscal conservative approach of reducing government intervention. In summary, while fiscal conservatism is about responsible financial management and limited government intervention in the economy, social conservatism is about promoting traditional social values and moral standards. These two ideologies can sometimes overlap, but generally have distinct focuses and approaches to governance.
So, what the hell is going on? Why does conservatism seem to be a grab bag of unrelated or even contradictory ideas? I'll say it again. It's not like some people want to make abortion illegal, and some other people want to deregulate businesses, and we lump them all together under the label of the right. We're talking about people who believe all of these things at the same time. And some of them also want to make it harder to get a divorce and would take away the right to vote from women if they could, and are pretty uncomfortable with people of different races getting married too. I had to stop adding points to the list sometime. The explanation is really interesting and also really important, but it's going to take a while to get there because it's also very complicated. There are a number of reasons, but the simple version is that it's because of, you guessed it, capitalism. Capitalism is responsible for all of the good things and all of the bad things that we're dealing with in life today. We're going to be talking about capitalism later on in this lecture. We're going to see how the story of capitalism intersects with the story of liberalism overthrowing and replacing feudalism, which intersects with the story about the group of political alignments that coalesce into what we call the left, is about spreading out power, usually political power, but other types of power as well. We'll get to it. Spreading out power as widely and as equally as possible among all the people in a society. And what we call the right is that group of political views and interests that opposes this project. The reason why we still use these words, left and right, that originated in a seating arrangement in France in the 1880s is because there is actually a strong and kind of hard to miss, honestly, continuity running all the way from the people who said, hey, maybe having one guy have all of the power of the state and the rest of us having none is maybe not a very good system, to people today saying maybe we shouldn't discriminate against people just because they aren't comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. In 1789, the people on the left wanted to replace monarchy with democracy, and the people on the right didn't want to replace monarchy with democracy. They wanted to keep monarchy. In the 1850s, the people on the left wanted to get rid of slavery, and the people on the right wanted to keep slavery. In the 1910s and 20s, people on the left wanted to extend the vote to women, and people on the right didn't want to extend the right to vote to women. In the 1990s and 2000s, the people on the left wanted to extend the right to marry to same-sex couples, and you guessed it, people on the right didn't want to extend the right to marry to same-sex couples. Do you see a pattern here? Right now, the fight seems to be over whether trans people should be allowed to exist. What do you think everyone will believe 100 years from now?